When asked if there was hope for humanity, Yuval Harari said, "Humankind can rise to the occasion if we keep our fears under control and be a bit more humble about our views." And so those two things and more are what we aim to do in the course that we'll tell you about tonight. But first we want to tell you who we are, and we're going to start with Joe Burgo. Joe?
Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Burko. I'm a clinical psychologist, therapist, psychoanalyst. I've been practicing for a frightening 40 years. I also write books in the pop psychology realm. My two most recent books are about shame and narcissism, and I suppose that's my area of expertise. But my most widely read book was my first book on psychological defense mechanisms. And we're going to be talking a lot about shame and defenses in especially in the first module of this course. I came to this work for a couple of reasons. I've also known Marla for an amazing 40 years, and I've been watching her over the last few years being involved in the bridging movement, trying to get conversation going across the political divide. And I thought I really wanted to be involved in some way if I could. So when the opportunity to collaborate came along, I kind of jumped at it. The other reason is kind
Oh,
of a little more personal. I feel lonely a lot of the time. I'm a sort of person who really likes engaged debate. My children would say that I like to argue, um, but I do like um, in-depth conversation with people who are well informed. And I find more and more of late that it's very hard to have those conversations. That it seems like if you're not exactly on the same page with people, they get angry or defensive, and I would include myself in that. I think I can be a little bit too vigorous about asserting my point of view and take umbrage when people don't agree with me. So that's what brings me here. I think that for myself personally and for the world at large, cultivating humility can really help us to listen to and talk to one another better. Marla.
Thank you. So some of you know me, some of you don't. Um, I'll just start from the latter part of my life. I started my career after raising a family a little late in life. In my 50s, I went back to graduate school and got my master's. And then I developed a thing called the School of the Examined Life, where I gave classes and workshops, and I even taught at the college here locally, using film watching as a portal to personal psychology. So it wasn't therapy, but it was kind of depth, going deeper. And so I have a lot of experience with groups, small groups especially. But then what happened more in my more recent history is after the presidential election of 2016, I woke up that morning thinking, I've got to do something about this political divide. And I had not been political. I kind of checked the box of how I was registered. I didn't research, I didn't question. I was really quite ignorant. And I didn't know what it meant to bridge the divide. And I found out, and I don't know if any of you had this experience, but I went forward, I said yes to it and dove in deep. And had I known how challenging it was going to be, I wouldn't have said yes. However, it's like the best thing I ever did. So in the class, in the actual course, I can talk more about that. But it really, I am more relaxed. My nervous system is way ratcheted down about some of these things that were before so life and death. I feel enriched as a person to understand more without being so opinionated. Like it's maybe sounds oxymoric, but it's actually very relaxing not to have so many friggin' opinions. And so that's kind of the spirit in which we're going to start this program. I've also been, so what I neglected to tell you is, so after I had that realization what I wanted to do, that's a whole long story what I ended up doing, but I partnered with a colleague, Rob Schlapfer, and we started doing lots of presentations and classes and book groups and film nights, and with all kinds of people, mostly in Oregon, all in Oregon, different places. And then I went on to work with several nonprofits, and then COVID's hit and things are up for grabs again. But that's kind of my background. And I want to go into the structure of tonight. So what we'll be talking about, Joe and I, for the next half hour is the content, the structure, and practical details of the course itself. And then after that, we'll open it up to Q&A. And we just ask that you save your questions. We might answer them in between time. And we do want to get through a certain amount of material. I'm also a big believer in, even though we are introducing you to the idea of the class, we're going to give you content so you'll have takeaways, whether you take our class or not. And so we'll end promptly at 7:30, and we will be recording this for people who miss it. Some people have to leave early, etc. So you can get in touch with me afterwards if you'd like the recording. So what Joe and I have found, both in and out of the political realm, that people can't talk about issues, whether personal or political, unless they're of some degree of calm and humble. And learning about and understanding that both in ourselves and other people really goes a long way into helping us in our personal lives, in all kind of applications, work, organizations, family, spouses, partners, all of that. So, Joe, you want to say your bit about this?
Yeah. So when I was in graduate school, one of my teachers said something very elegant and profound to us. He said that the purpose of therapy is to teach our clients how to feel deeply and think clearly. It sounds really simple, but it's actually very hard, I think. I think we all know that when people are in extreme states of emotion, they don't think clearly. We know that when people are enraged, they tend to make poor choices. That part's obvious, but I think on a subtler, more pervasive level, there's a problem with the way our own psychological defenses interfere with our ability to think clearly. And what I mean is this: is that my favorite definition of a psychological defense is a lie that we tell ourselves to avoid feeling pain. There's lots of emotions that are painful, like feeling doubt, feeling insecure, feeling shamed, feeling threatened. And when we feel these kinds of pain, our defense mechanisms, everybody's, naturally kick in. It's a self-protective thing. And they're usually very effective at the expense of our ability to think in more complicated ways. So what we will do is that if we're feeling threatened by feeling uncertain or doubtful, what we might do is we might retreat to a position of certainty, being absolutely certain, and project out our doubts and our shames into other people. Unfortunately, usually they're our most intimate relationships, and they suffer as a result of it. So Marla and I have found that, cultivating a sense of humility and being more conscious about the way we can retreat to defensive postures to save ourselves from pain will be helpful in all of our personal relationships and in our sense of self.
Thanks, Joe. I want to take a minute to define humility. I looked up the dictionary definition, and it said a modest opinion or estimate of one's own importance, rank, etc. But Joe and I see it a little bit differently. And what we would say is it's having an accurate self-assessment, knowing your strengths and limitations without shame, and kind of the feeling of nothing to prove, nothing to hide, and nothing to defend without shame. There's a writer right now, Adam Grant, who's written a book called Think Again. It's very good, highly recommended. And he has a chapter about developing humility and confidence, which I think is really, really beautiful. And I don't know how, if any of you have seen 12 Angry Men, the old one with Henry Fonda, but I would say he's the perfect example of humility and confidence. He always says, I don't know, but let's look at all these facts. It's a great, actually, discussion film. Maybe if we get a group going, we'll do a film night with it, because it really starts parsing out these cognitive problems that we have when we're trying to assess situations. What we want to do now is show you a 3-4 minute clip called The Joy of Being Wrong by the Templeton Foundation. So Barb, take it away.
We've all been in arguments. And it wouldn't be an argument if you didn't believe that you were right and they were wrong. But aren't we all wrong sometimes? No one is right about all the things all the time. Research shows that admitting that we might be wrong can actually help us be better friends, happier people, and more effective advocates for our beliefs. This is called intellectual humility, and it's a gift. Not the kind you're born with, but the kind you can give yourself. So why don't we? Why is it so hard to admit that we might be wrong? In our minds, our ideas, assumptions, and experiences weave together to form our picture of the world. So you can see why it's painful to admit that something we believe in is wrong. One tug on the thread and it can feel like our whole sense of self is unraveling. In fact, studies show that our brains actually react to attacks on our beliefs the same way as threats to our physical well-being. Our natural human tendency is to avoid those threats, surround ourselves with people who think just like us. It doesn't matter how smart or well-educated you are, anyone can fall into these traps. But we can break out of these bubbles. Our ideas don't need to limit us. We just need to remember that some of the things we know are wrong or incomplete. It doesn't have to feel like a failure. It can feel like a relief. We can let go of the ideas that were holding us back from growth. This is one of the key features of intellectual humility, that willingness to accept and admit that you might be wrong. Early research shows that people who practice intellectual humility make more thoughtful decisions, have stronger connections with their friends and partners, and are more tolerant, which could lead to a happier life. We live in a time where there's pressure to appear like you're always right. But recognizing an incompleteness in our knowledge isn't weakness or ignorance. It's the opposite. It turns every day into an opportunity to learn and grow. In fact, people who practice intellectual humility are shown to be better at recognizing persuasive arguments. That means you could be a more effective advocate for your beliefs by allowing them to be challenged. The scientific method asks us to test every idea, question every theory, and that discipline is responsible for much of the explosive progress that has defined the last 2 centuries. Intellectual humility is the same principle applied to the individual, constantly refining your understanding of the world and yourself. The person you are now only exists because the person you were was willing to grow into something new. Intellectual humility is that willingness. It allows us to constantly search through our understanding of the world and bit by bit, make it better. Learn more about research on intellectual humility at templeton.org/discoveries.
So now we're going to talk about the content of the class itself, and Joe's going to start off with module 1 and 2.
Right. So the first module, which we're just going to call Cultivating Humility, we're gonna talk about all the psychological ways that we defend ourselves when we feel threatened or confused. So we're going to talk about how to recognize our psychological defense mechanisms at work, especially when we're triggered, when we're in a state of a fight or flight response, when we feel threatened. We're going to talk about contempt and self-righteousness as defensive responses for the offloading or projecting of feelings of shame and doubt, especially in our intimate relationships. I just think this particular concept is responsible for most arguments in intimate relationships. And the goal of this section is for the participants to have a deeper sense of the automatic and usually self-deceptive ways that everybody, that's all of us, dispose of painful emotion and uncomfortable feelings of doubt and uncertainty, often at the expense of people around us. So step one of this process of our course is learning to recognize that we've been emotionally triggered and are responding in defensive ways to a perceived threat. So then, I mean, that's sort of, I think about that, that's the emotional psychological bit. And then in the second module, which we're calling critical thinking and getting to I'm not sure, we're going to focus more on the cognitive skills, critical thinking skills, and using them to focus and understand our own biases. And we really believe strongly that being humble in the face of just how fallible human beings are is key. You know, some of you are probably familiar with the research in this area on cognitive bias. And we're so prone to an array of cognitive errors. You know, examples are motivated reasoning and confirmation bias. You've probably heard of those. But the other one that we both think is really important is emotional reasoning. Seems really common. It feels true and right to me, so it must be true. So in this module, we're going to try to help participants recognize when your critical skills have been disabled, and when they cause you to feel certain in your knowledge, when you actually may know less than you think. So step two in this whole process is recognizing cognitive biases that reinforce your sense of certainty and which will help us to reach I'm not sure. And now Marla's going to talk about the third module.
Right. So I get to do one of the ones I love the best. I love the topic of zooming out. And there's a slide I want to show you, Barbara. And it kind of, Joe found it somewhere, I'm not sure where, just really recently. And it really felt to me like this is my journey. You know, I know everything. There's more to this than I thought. Then overwhelmed, I'm never going to understand this. It's starting to make sense. And trust me, it's complicated. And it's complicated in my experience in these, 4 years. We need to take this journey. And we need humility. We need to understand ourselves to get there. So, so you can take the slide down now, Barbara, please. So in the class with module 1 and module 2, we've kind of zoomed in, right? We've zoomed in to understand ourselves, and not only ourselves, but other human beings. Like we all have these operating systems that are set up basically the same. And so now, knowing those things, we can zoom out. And what I mean by zooming out is I want you to do a little exercise, please. Take your hands and your fingers and go like this, make a square, and just look at some part of the room that you're in and make a note. Like right now, I see a lamp and a picture. Okay. So now go about, 90 degrees or 45 degrees even, and look at another part. And I'm seeing my chimney. You're seeing something else probably then. So if you were trying to describe your room or the context of your environment, you need a bigger frame. And I've been tracking a lot of the problem with media today, which is a whole big other discussion. But, one of the problems is that, well, even with the documentary filmmakers, people can crop pictures or only show certain aspects of the things they want to prove their point, right? Well-intentioned as it might be, it's not giving you the whole picture. And so zooming out means being able to get the biggest possible perspective on what is or what's going on. I don't like the words truth and reality because those have become questionable, unfortunately. But I do think to talk about it in terms of let me get the lay of the land, what's really going on here. And some of you may have heard the old fable about the blind men and the elephant, where 5 blind men were asked to describe and define an elephant. One took the trunk, one took the tail, one took the foot. And of course, they could only define the elephant by the part that they could perceive. And we're all the blind men. We all need other people to help us see what the what is. And this is something that Joe and I are really going to focus on ultimately, is viewpoint diversity. So the word diversity these days is a huge, it's a popular word, let's say that. However, viewpoint diversity, not so much. And it's really funny because in different talks that Rob and I had over the last 5 years, we would say, how many of you have heard of the term viewpoint diversity? And not very many people had. They weren't aware of it as even a concept. So often what happens, and as we've described in our email, the first 3 classes are only going to be more personally oriented than politically. But in the sense of politics, what ends up happening is somebody with an opposing point of view is going to say something, and I start tuning them out. That is called contempt prior to investigation. That means I've discounted whatever's going to come out of that person's mouth before I even look into it. But we need each other, to show us our blind spots. We need to work together on this. So I want to cut a couple of the things we're going to be covering in the zooming out part are these. There's so much more, but just to give you an idea, one of my other favorite topics is the dynamics of when any of us take a very strong moral stance, oftentimes immovable, based on partial, biased, wrong, or outdated information. So one of the things that I found when I started down this road and started educating myself on all kinds of levels, that often the opinions that I held, I had formed 15 years ago. And I never did the upgrade. I never got the system upgrade, and that, because new information and new thinking is coming out all the time, we really do stay informed. And it's reminding me of a quote now. I can't remember who said it, but it was something like, if only people could say, oh, I don't know enough about X to have an opinion. Let me do some reading and I'll get back to you. He said, if only 90% of the people did that, we'd be in a much different world. But again, we can't really get there until we have the humility and the calm to be able to say, I could be wrong about this. And I'm, like I said before, it's a very liberating place to be. The other thing that we'll be doing is we're going to be moving away from black and white thinking. It's in psychology, it's called splitting, where I'm wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm good, you're bad. These very totally ungray things. And the truth is that people and life are more gray than black and white. So, I like to call it nudging towards nuance, and again, this enriches us as people to have so much more understanding of the world. The other part of that is something called complicating the narrative. There's a journalist named Amanda Ripley who wrote a really good article in the Atlantic a number of years ago. And there are journalists, too few of them, sadly, that are trying to present better pieces that really show, like we did the frames. They try to put more frames in there because we need to see the whole landscape instead of just discounting certain views. And that could be the views of our partner or our boss, right? There's a quote by F. Scott Fitzgerald that I really love. It says, he goes, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold 2 opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function." So our class we guarantee that you'll have that ability at the end of it. And I'll just close with this, my part. Much of the time we're convinced that we're perceiving the world accurately through our personal experience and the information accurate or not to which we've been exposed. And we really need to cultivate the ability to question our own beliefs and how we've come to have them, and then be able to zoom out beyond our personal lenses and filters to get a more accurate view of the world at large. So now Joe will talk about, for those of you who get through, the part 1, there will be a part 2 in January. And Joe, take it away.
Right. So as Marla has said, the focus of this first set of modules is going to be the interpersonal. It's not going to be political. Both of us at the same time are really interested in applying these particular ideas and skills to the political divide. And so for those of you who get through this first part and have an interest in that topic, we're going to do a second set of modules in the new year. And taking these skills and applying them to the toxic political divide in our country. So for that set of course, part 1 is a prerequisite, because we feel like these skills that we're going to try and develop together are essential to be able to really start looking at these politically thorny issues. And as Marla said, we're big believers in the value of viewpoint diversity, and that it's really the only way we're going to be able to address some of the complex challenges we face in our country and in our world is if we get everyone to the table. It can't be my side is going to prevail. So in order to sort of bridge that divide, we have several goals in this second set of modules. We're going to explain the differing philosophical and moral foundations of both right and left, and how that leads to mutual misunderstanding. If any of you are familiar with Jonathan Haidt's work on moral foundations, we're not 100% in agreement with him, but that we definitely find that a really useful lens for approaching the left-right misunderstanding. We're going to talk about the perception gap between what we believe about the political other and what actually is true. Both sides carry around a lot of misconceptions about, those people over there. The other thing is we're going to try to talk about what's right about the other side and what's so scary about admitting that they might have something useful to say. And I think undergirding it all, this point that Marla is making is that we need each other. We need viewpoint diversity so we can get the best possible picture as we're going to try and solve the problems that we face. So once we've sort of gone through laying all that groundwork, we're then going to zoom out and apply all of this thinking and all of the skills that we developed in the first set of courses to tackle a few political issues from multiple perspectives, and like keeping track of our own reactions, our own doubts and confusions, the ways which we want to defend against it, the ways we'll harden up, all the things we've learned to notice about ourselves, and see if we can actually embrace these issues from a more tolerant, open-minded, less defended perspective. So that's part 2. Marla?
Okay, so now I'm going to go through the logistics, the dates and times. So for part 1, it'll be the first Saturday of each month in the afternoons, 1 to 4, so 3 hours, but we will stay on for another hour. Our thinking is there is really a lot of material, and I know from experience it's really hard to make a class more than 3 hours right now, especially on Zoom. So, but for those people who want to kick around some ideas and discuss, we'll stay on. We will not be teaching, so I don't want people that don't stay to feel like they're going to miss out, right? We won't be presenting new material. So the dates, and we can, I'll be sending out an email, but just so you know, the dates will be Saturday, October 2nd, November 6th, and December 4th. And so for part 2, we have earmarked January 8th, February 12th, and March 12th. Again, we can get this all to you in writing. The format will do a presentation, a teaching piece. We'll use clips. I like those a lot. And then there'll be some form of exercise. Now, I want to just take a minute and explain. The exercises will be, we'll present a question for you to talk about with a partner. What happens with people, in my experience, is that we all have different modes that we're more comfortable in. Like, we will leave an option for people who just want to use that time to journal if they're really uncomfortable with one-on-one. And then we will discuss in the large group. And some people are more comfortable in a large group, some people one-on-one, and some people on their own. But it, you know, in terms of growth, it is good to kind of push that boundary, but we also want to respect where people are. And we can talk about that as it happens. But it also gives all those three different ways, the journaling, the one-on-one, and the big group, also bring out different aspects. It's also really important to hear how other people's thinking and processes are going. And then, yeah, we'll have a discussion at the end to wrap it up. The cost is for the 3 classes, a sliding scale that's based on your decision, not ours, $50 to $150 for all 3 classes. Now, if you have any problem with that, even the low end, please get in touch. We don't want anyone not to do this because of money, but we do know that it's good for people to ante up a little bit. They tend to be more committed to do the whole thing. And it really is, it's a piece. The 3 classes are of a piece. So we want to also encourage people to stay the course. So if you're interested in signing up, please email me. And we have a minimum of 8 people, because any less than that, there's just not enough juice in the group. And if someone, a couple people don't show up, it gets small really fast. And what we'll do is take a maximum of 20. In the case that we get more than 20, we'll break it up into 2 groups and pick another Saturday. We feel like over 20, it's not, people don't get enough time to share. It just becomes way too impersonal. People don't get to know each other. So email me, and then I'll get an idea if we have enough people, and then we'll email you again to how to pay or make other arrangements. Now, there's a few miscellaneous items to talk about. As I've said, 3 hours a month is not much. So there'll be some required homework, but we'll make it really easy. Clips, 3, 4, 5 minutes, TED Talks. So those will be 15 or 20 minutes, and very limited reading. But for those of you who want to go deeper, we will have a lot of suggestions that you're free to, but we can't possibly cover everything we need to cover in 3 hours of time. We will be recording those classes, and we will, when you're breaking up into your small, your partner exercises, that won't be recorded, but your sharing in the bigger discussion will, but only to the people in our group that haven't, had to be absent or actually wanted to rewatch it. What Joe and I might do in the future is edit out our presentation part to use for other ways, but we won't share your personal sharing on, social media. We also will set up a private Facebook page so that you guys can converse, and we will be checking it once a day, and commenting and asking questions and things like that. So that's a nice support thing. And yeah, so we want to end this part with one last clip, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So this is a short clip by Catherine Schultz, who wrote the book Being Wrong, which I really, really recommend. So Barbara.
Think for a moment about what it means to feel right. It means that you think that your beliefs just perfectly reflect reality. And when you feel that way, you've got a problem to solve. which is, how are you going to explain all of those people who disagree with you? It turns out most of us explain those people the same way, by resorting to a series of unfortunate assumptions. The first thing we usually do when someone disagrees with us is we just assume they're ignorant. They don't have access to the same information that we do, and when we generously share that information with them, they're going to see the light and come on over to our team. When that doesn't work, then we move on to a second assumption, which is that they're idiots. They have all the right pieces of the puzzle, and they are too moronic to put them together correctly. And when that doesn't work, then we move on to a third assumption. They know the truth, and they are deliberately distorting it for their own malevolent purposes. This attachment to our own rightness causes us to treat each other terribly. But you know, to me, what's most baffling and most tragic about this is that it misses the whole point of being human. The miracle of your mind isn't that you can see the world as it is. It's that you can see the world as it isn't. We can remember the past, and we can think about the future, and we can imagine what it's like to be some other person in some other place. And we all do this a little differently, which is why we can all look up at the same night sky and see this, and also this, and also this. And yeah, you know, it is also why we get things wrong. If you really want to rediscover wonder, you need to step outside of that tiny, terrified space of rightness and look around at each other and look out at the vastness and complexity and mystery of the universe and be able to say, wow, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, now we will open up for Q&A. What we'd like you to do is, I don't know if you all know the raising your hand function, but that is, let's see, if you go into participants, I believe, isn't that where it is, Barbara? You go into participants and you raise your own hand, or is there a better way to do that?
I think that's it. As the host, I can't actually do it.
Oh, you can't
So,
see? Okay, let me
but-
see if I can raise my hand. Oh, no. It's not letting me.
It's under reactions on
I
some of
think
our
it's,
Zooms.
yeah, it's
People-
under reactions now.
Oh, okay, great.
Yep.
So if you can raise your hand and then it'll, I know on the list, it puts you in order and then I can start calling on people in order. So any questions about, you know, the function of it or even the content that we talked about tonight, whatever it is that you want to know. Don't make me call names. And make sure to unmute when
Yep.
you.
I have a question for Joe and Marla, if you want to
Okay.
give your
great.
opinion too. I've been studying a little bit more about cognitive behavioral therapy, and it sounds like a lot of this is really basic to your presentation. Could Joe or somebody kind of comment on where they see the technique of cognitive behavioral therapy fitting into this teaching module?
Yeah, I'm not a CBT therapist. I don't strongly, I think it's really valuable, but it's really going to be quite different from that, at least in the first module, is that we're going to be focusing on defense mechanisms, which are ways of dealing with painful emotion. It's not going to be about programming our cognitive errors the way CBT might do, but it's more about learning to recognize when you've been triggered, learning how to calm yourself to kind of disarm the defense mechanism so that you can find a different way of dealing with that emotion that's underneath. Does that answer the question?
Thanks, Joe. Who else? Anybody?
Lauren has her hand up.
Okay. Oh, Lauren, hi. Good to
Hi,
meet you.
Marla. Hi, Joe. Good to see you, Joe. and Good to meet you, Marla. It's just a question about if you feel comfortable answering. How did you come to do this work? I'm really curious about what life circumstances or experiences or learnings led you to want to do this kind of incredibly important work. Why were you called to this?
Are you asking both of us or either of us? Oh, you're muted now. I can't.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, if we have the time, that would be.
Well, yeah, it came to me after I saw what happened after the election in 2016. I just thought, and really, I don't know really how to explain it to myself, but it was a drive. It was in the best possible way. I didn't feel I had a choice. And so then I, in a good way, like went forward, not knowing really what it was going to take. And then each step of the way, I just started educating myself in, some of what we're going to talk about in part one, like the emotional part. It was so hard for me to take in different perspectives at the beginning that honestly, there were many days where I would get in a hot bath for 3 or 4 times to calm my nervous system. So that's one of the things that Joe and I will be talking about a lot in the first class is, like they said in that clip we saw, our body reacts to opposing ideas as if they're physical threats. We have to start delaminating all of these survival mechanisms with our reactivity. But so that's part of the story. Is that enough for now? Okay.
I'll add my half to that. So as I said, I've known Marla for 40 years, and we've had periods of greater and lesser closeness over this time. But after one period of time when we hadn't been all that close, I tuned back in, and all of a sudden I discovered there was this other person there in lieu of the one who had been there before, who was not politically engaged in sense of advocacy, but doing this kind of work, she was saying. And we were shockingly reading the same books, interested in the same set of ideas. And I really hadn't no clue about the bridging movement and the kind of work they were doing. And I went up to Ashland's to visit for a friendship visit, and we made it to coincide with one of the workshops they were giving. And I saw what they were doing, and I got really excited. And then there is again, as I said, the loneliness bit. I consider myself homeless politically, but I live in a world that is kind of monolithically blue. And I disagree a lot of the time with the people that I'm around, and I keep my mouth shut a lot of the time. And that just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right. I've got to find better ways to voice my opinions that's not going to alienate me from everybody around me. And I've got to find a way to listen to other people, without dismissing them, and try and find better ways of having conversations. So those are my two paths to getting to this work.
Thanks, Joe. Allie, and nice to meet you. Welcome.
Hey, yeah. Oh, I love how synchronicity works, and you ask the universe for answers and then things show up, and that's what this is for me. So I'm very excited. I definitely want to take the course. I wanted a little clarification about the cost. Is it $150 for all 3 of the first modules, or is it $150 per module?
No, $150 for the 3 classes.
Got it. Okay.
That's the high end, right? 50 to
or less if you can't afford that.
Yeah.
Right.
I love what you just said, Joe, because that's how I felt too. I went down to California to help my mother because she fell and broke her hip, and then COVID hit, and I was there, and I was in a sea of blue, and I'm a blue person, but it was so blue that I felt like reality was just getting too skewed, and like you, I felt like I had no vehicle. And what I'm seeing on Facebook right now, I mean, this is such timely work. We have to find a way to be able to communicate with each other. And I love what you said too, Marla, about your body and having to take, it's like the body remembers. It remembers the trauma. It you might even be thinking completely differently, but the body is reacting, and then everything shows up again. So I'm really, I can't wait. I think this is
Oh, good.
really
Awesome.
big.
I'll
Thank you.
sign you up, our first sign up.
Yes, you got me.
I want to piggyback on what you said, because, 4 years of giving these classes mostly are in progressive places, not only, but people would come up to me during the break quietly and say, man, I've been having thoughts, but I can't give these other ideas or questions. And that's one sign when you know that you're in, and this is also a definition of a cult, but when
Right.
if there's an ideology running something, ideology brooks no questions, brooks no dissent, there's no room for inquiry. So that's a sign that, it's not tolerant of anything that's not the party line. So
Yeah.
I think there's something going on around that. And yeah. So
Yeah, and I just wrote something up that I'm going to put on Facebook tomorrow, probably, about what I'm seeing is it's prejudice in the making. I mean, it's the definition of prejudice. This does divisiveness of, you go away because you haven't done this, or you done this. So go. It's just, and ultimately, it's kind of all fear. So.
okay, well, we'll get into it.
Right?
Yeah. Great to meet you.
I just want to reiterate, for people who really aren't interested in going to that part, we're going to be steering clear of the big political stuff in the first 3 modules. This is going to focus more on the interpersonal, but it's all laying groundwork for.
And I think that that's brilliant. And to be honest, it does start with me. If I can't manage my own thoughts, opinions, feelings, understandings, and defenses, then I can't be a bridge. I can't help others. So, so I appreciate the fact that you start with that, because
Good.
we can't see our own shadows, right? So
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
yeah.
CT.
Hi.
Hi.
I unmuted and I look scary tonight, so I was being anonymous, but I do have a question.
Yes.
I encounter this more politically, but I think it's also true. It's clearly true interpersonally, just on other topics. There are certainly times when I think I'm right and I won't be convinced otherwise. But there are other times when I feel fairly confident of my opinion, but I'm really open to the other person's opinion. And I find that they're just a brick wall. They're incredibly rigid. I cannot get them to see anything that I'm saying. Like, we're not really having a dialogue. Are you guys going to be talking about tools to deal with the other person's reactions and rigidity? I feel like that's something that I would find hugely beneficial.
Joe and I haven't talked about that so much. There's a lot of really great work by other people who are focusing just on that. I highly recommend, and I do believe this is free. Braver Angels does a course about depolarizing within, but I also think they have one called like Tools and Skills. And they really, really go through it. So they are specialized in that. What I've found, CT, honestly, is the more that I am calm, and it's a real calm, not a forced calm. Like, that's not me saying, calm down, Marla. It's really much calm. Over 4 years, I've calmed down. It can de-escalate, and it can make the other person feel safe. And especially, there's little things that I do that are sincere, like, especially at the beginning, where I could say, what's really helpful and really changes the playing field is if I say, yeah, about my side, I'm politically homeless now, like Joe, but back then, my side that I was really disappointed or I find fault with. And at the same token, to say on the other side, if I can genuinely say, oh, and on that side or on your side, I really admire or appreciate X. And there's always those two things. I mean, there's that splitting again. If it's not, my side is always right and the other side is always wrong. There's both in each. But that's just a little tool that I use, but it has to be genuine.
But
That
can I
makes
say something also? I
Sure.
want to add to that I think sometimes you just have to let go of the idea of persuasion. You just like the other person is closed and you're not going to change. I mean, there's nothing you can do to change them. You kind of need to let go of that. And sometimes it's just an opportunity to find out more. You know, just ask questions, find out more about what they think.
Yeah, and how they got there, how they
Yeah.
came to that conclusion.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
it was
Okay.
interesting. My friend Ted, who Lauren knows, asked me when I was talking to him about this. He said, "So is learning humility, is that a tool for use in persuasion?" And I thought it was such a telling question. And I said, no, it's not about persuasion.
Oh, man. Thanks, Joe. Leela. Oh, yeah, unmute.
Hi.
I
Well, I just want to express my appreciation to you, Marla and Joe, but Marla I've known for a while, and my conversations with you have repeatedly opened my mind and watched so many emotions come up. And it's like, how do I deal with the reconciling I hear you, but I feel differently. And so I'm very happy about this first module, learning to reconcile within myself. But I think I'm piggybacking on CT's question is that I often come up with a hopelessness, how to face my own hopelessness when I'm facing somebody who's, I can't persuade, I don't need to or want to persuade, but I feel maybe devastated, like, wow, the divide feels so big. Or sometimes it's with my son, it's just like so big. I don't know how to reconcile my own feelings with opposition.
you know, I'm not sure because this is just coming up for me now, but I have the feeling that in those first 3 modules, especially the first 2, without directly addressing the question, how do I stand in the face of this brick wall? I have the feeling that there's going to be a kind of magic, and I'm not trying to use that in a woo-woo way. That I think something will happen. I just know from my own process, like I look back at these 4 years and I think, oh, I wasn't teaching. I was in my teacher training program. I learned the stuff kind of organically, right? Without it being laid out. And so I just think this softening of humility, this softening of needing to be right. And, you know, somewhere in there with the cognitive stuff, we're going to learn that, you know, we get worked up about things that may not need to be worked up about. I mean, I like what Joe said too about not needing to persuade or not needing the other person to change their mind. But I do think something will shift. It's been my experience, and people who come regularly to my classes have reported such changes. So I hope that makes sense.
I also think there's a certain kind of modeling going on, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
You're modeling a kind of tolerant openness for the other person that whether or not they acknowledge it at the moment, I think it's taken in, it's observed, and it can make a difference over time.
Thanks. Now, Ellen, I thought your hand had been up. Did it go down?
Well, Joe kind of put right at the last what I was going to mention, but I will add one thing to this idea of questioning the people that you're trying to understand their points of view. If you just, in my experience, if I just ask lots of questions, we both go away feeling kind of good, me more understanding where they're coming from, but they feel respected, I think. They feel like, hey, he's interested or in me. And, you know, that preserves the relationship. I have several friends, probably half a dozen, that look at things totally different or opposite that I do. But my intent is not to lose those relationships. And I want to continue the discussion with them. I want to show them that I do respect them as human beings and am willing to interact and ask questions. And that's seemingly has worked really well for me.
That's powerful.
Yeah, and I want to reflect, Alan, if I may, because Alan brought us to Bend when Rob and I were working together, did this fabulous weekend. We did 3 presentations. It was actually, I never told you, Alan, but it was the high point of my career, actually, that weekend. So magical. But I've seen you, now for 2-3 years, and you have worked really hard at exploring these things and reading. You turn up at a lot of the bridging things, the other organizations, and I can see that it's really paid off. So thank you for your work. Makes a difference. Okay, well, we have time for one last quick question or comment, and then we'll say goodnight.
This is Carolyn. Am I unmuted? Yeah. Hi there. Hi there.
Carolyn.
Thank you.
And Leela and others. Well, about the hopefulness or lack of hope, actually, I'm just wondering, are you finding some company in this journey? I mean, besides us here, or in the general public? Because I am finding examples of independent news show hosts who are they choose, they're in a couple of channels. They're not the big networks, but the independent ones, who one identifies as a conservative, the other as a progressive, and yet they bring these broad perspective together, and it's interesting when they disagree. I just see this modeling going on recently, and I'm just so hopeful.
Yeah, it's true. And, I think around the same time I got this idea, a lot of other people did. There's a lot of bridging organizations, that's what I call them, that started right around the same time that I had the idea. And I think that I'm not going to go into the whole history of the bridging movement, but I do think they're maturing. At first, it was more, it wasn't as bridging as it is becoming now, but I'm seeing a lot of evidence of goodwill. And actually, the study, there's a study called the Hidden Tribe Study, and they, by their account in the US, there's only about 15%, I think they parsed it out to 8 on the left and 6 on the right, that are really the strong, hyperpolarized people. Most of the 85% in the middle are really much more shades of purple. So between the media and the politicians and the really loud people and the influencers on social media, I think we also have a misperception about how polarized. So that's one of the things we get into in part 2, talk about the perception gap, which is pretty huge. So it's 7:30. I really want to thank each and every one of you for showing up. I think it's a big deal. And, let us hear from you if you want to take next steps, and we'll make that happen.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Marla and Joe. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm signing up.
Who's that said that?
Lauren,
Oh, great. Yeah, awesome.
thank you.
Signing up.
Who else who said that?
Okay,
Leela?
Leela.
Yay.
Okay, it looks like we got the class.
Good.
Yay.
Awesome.
If I want to send this video to somebody who I think would be an asset and appreciate coming, how do I do that?
So, well, I'll send you a link. Maybe I'll send you all a link that you can send to whoever you want.
That'd be
Right?
great.
Yeah, that
They
would be
could watch this evening.
Great.
okay. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. Good night, all.
Good night.
So Marla, I sent you an email in the middle of the class about this. I have a strategic planning thing I'm doing on the November day.
Yeah.
And I would undoubtedly be showing up late.
Oh, that's fine.
Will that be okay?
Oh, totally. And we'll, if you've missed content, we'll send you the recording anyway. But I think what I neglected to say is probably, it depends how many people are there, but there'll be some kind of, probably some kind of little check-in in the first bit of time, like what people have noticed. Maybe not everyone will get to speak, but I don't know. I haven't worked out all the details. It really does depend
Uh-huh.
on the members. But oh,
Yeah.
I know that you want to come. That's
Yeah, I do. My other question I didn't want to ask in front of everybody, which is, I feel like I've already worked on this a lot, Marla. I feel
Well,
like I'm already like halfway there, and like it's what, like you, that same story, the night of the election, I had a calling to do something. So
yeah, and you've done it. You know,
yeah, and I do pretty well, but I also, the woman who talked about the hopelessness, I've been really struggling with that lately, because even I just can't talk to any of my conservative friends right now. I can listen to them, but I can't talk to them. And it makes me sad and
Yeah.
makes me feel hopeless. One of them kind of unfriended all of his, he just announced he was not going to talk to any more liberals ever again.
Oh,
And
wow.
on Facebook, and I said, you know, I'm gonna miss you, sweetie. That's all I can say.
Heidi, you know, I know I don't need to say this, but I will.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we never know the seeds we're planting.